If you're going to steal my parts and then sell them back to me, could you at least clean them first, as a courtesy? Ah, there you are.
Was beginning to think you weren't coming.
I didn't necessarily know how I was going to make this video. It's actually one of the scripts I had considered skipping and revisiting after a few weeks' time, but that kind of delay just isn't fair to the loyal Star Wars audience we've built on this channel. Nor was marketing this series as a return of Obi-Wan Kenobi entirely fair to Star Wars fans. Yikes. Yeah, that's rough. I know, I'm sorry, I had to rip the band-aid off so bluntly, but alas, Kenobi's 6-episode special event has concluded, and with it comes the moment where I sit down in front of you and ask the question, was this worth it? Was Obi-Wan Kenobi able to justify its own existence, and did we get the show we were promised? Deserved? Even the show we'd hoped for? Well, I genuinely don't think I've ever been this emotionally and physically excited for the release of a new Star Wars property since maybe The Force Awakens, because my god, it was the return of Star Wars, so going into Kenobi, I naturally had expectations. We all did. I covered it extensively in a prior video. We as a community had discussions and theories and trailer breakdowns and all kinds of imaginable hype because there hasn't been a tangibly consistent and proven track record of quality in the past few years. And we were all preparing ourselves for the version of Obi-Wan we had been dying to see. That version specifically starts in the name. This name carries a legacy and a weight that no other character in this universe really does, so my expectations rose to meet that criteria. And what exactly were the stakes? Hopefully a series that attempted an extensive psychoanalytical narrative by honing in on adult themes and using pre-existing movies and lore to strategically fill in the canon when necessary. All of this then being used to reflect back upon Kenobi in a way that looks to deconstruct the hero through meaningful dialogue and economy of story. Things such as side characters, background details, small personal exchanges, and all available environments. Not even The Mandalorian in all its esteemed glory was as anticipated as this series was from all generations of Star Wars fans. So when it came time to embark upon this 6-episode adventure, I took a huge breath and crossed my fingers. What came next was, well, frustrating. A 6-episode miniseries clocking in at around 40 to 45 minutes an episode was the first big red flag. This character, this show, needed more time to tell the right story, and with so much to cover and so much not getting addressed, limiting ourselves to only 6 episodes was an unusual decision. Look, I know this was originally meant to be a movie, and they had to stretch the plot out to fill an extra 4 episodes, but the series was marketed as something unique, something cinematically rich and highly budgeted, something worth sitting down for hours on end, which made the runtime of each episode and shockingly inconsistent special effects feel entirely unexpected. I'm not gonna say I could write a competent script anywhere near as clean as someone who studied theater and film their whole lives, but I would absolutely make the argument that when the story ideas for the framework of this series are so painfully clear, and the canon you have at your disposal is begging to be used and interpreted for a character of this magnitude, it would likely require more effort to overlook those opportunities. The original essence of the Obi-Wan film and the Obi-Wan experience is clearly here, deep within the show's subconscious, with its themes literally manifesting themselves as Kenobi sleeps in the first episode, but choosing to explore any of said themes at only surface level is what felt to me like the most offensive direction for the story of this character. It says to the audience, those that know of his importance and those that don't, that this story itself is afraid of its own hero. Obi-Wan is fresh off of the most traumatic events of his lifetime, and though it has been 10 years since, there is a responsibility from the creative team to walk the viewer through the gaps and reinforce the adult themes in the first leg of the adventure. Now, to the show's credit, we did get quiet moments, we did get soft reflection, but when it was time to cut deeper and explore deeper, the show pulled back, changing tones and subverting our expectations with a break of pace that, in hindsight, was quite jarring. Leia is awesome, and as an addition to the series, she worked in moments, but her inclusion began to directly affect the pathos of the journey that needed to be covered for Obi-Wan alone, and thus we come to our first problem with this series: the tone. If episodes 1 through 3 were solely about Obi-Wan and his relationship with himself, Leia's inclusion into the mix wouldn't have felt as abrasive as I think it came off. We could have used her like we did in episode 3, where her very existence called into question Obi-Wan's actions up until this time, leaving room for conversations that begin the reflection and reconstruction process of our hero, allowing for necessary insights such as this.
Are you my real father?
I wished I could say I was. But no, I'm not.
Sometimes I try to imagine what he was like.
I know that feeling. As Jedi, we're taken from our families when we're very young. I still have glimpses. Flashes, really. My mother's shawl. My father's hands. I remember a baby.
A baby?
Yes, I think I had a brother. I really don't remember him. I wished I did. Then I joined the Jedi and I got a new family, just like you.
This exchange is phenomenal. This is one of the best moments in the entire show because not only does it look visually fantastic, but the conversation here has merit, it has depth, it has meaning within the canon and between the characters, but most of all, it understands tone. It doesn't try to rush the plot forward with another CW chase scene. It doesn't drag Obi-Wan along as another body to fill in the background of a mediocre story. It gives time to Obi-Wan's character to be a character. The most we learn about Obi-Wan ever is in this small exchange, and it's the moments where Obi-Wan is allowed to be himself, talking about his perspective or the life he's lost, where this show really hits it out of the park. Leia was used as a catalyst for Obi-Wan's reflection, and in this we see how easy it is to tell a story worth telling and why it works the way it does. The problem is, Obi-Wan only explores these interpersonal relationships briefly, in fleeting moments before the plot decides it needs to get going again, and we as an audience are longing for those conversations. We want the world that's available to Kenobi to be explored. We want the conversations that slow the plot down to continue. We want the character moments between those of legacy and those of marketability to dive deeper. Yet, we are never given more than a few lines. When these moments are happening, the show is leaning into what was marketed to fans, and that's why it works so damn well. We know what we want to see. We know what we expected to see because the story is finally following its natural path towards a proper character study. But before it gives in to that path ahead, it slams on the brakes and commits itself to something entirely different. This show so often felt as if it was afraid of being as authentic to its own main character as it needed to be, as if it was afraid of being too depressing or too mature, and instead wanted to save the audience from those emotions in favor of a more uplifting adventure. This was not the time to tell a story of hope, at least not with the Kenobi we have now. So with the adventure we did get, there absolutely were positives, and those are the moments worth celebrating. Seeing Hayden Christensen back as Anakin was a dream of a lifetime for us prequel kids, and the two of them interacting was something ripped right out of the extended lore in the books. Seeing Darth Vader as a slasher flick serial killer having his way, and his way only, was the perfect amount of justice for the greatest movie villain of all time. Obi-Wan and Vader's dialogue, as brief as it was, told me that the writers understood just how important the relationship between these two is for cinema and how to properly express it. All of these elements are done so well, with so much care and attention to detail, that it makes the remaining portions of this story so ungratifying, because Obi-Wan shines brightest when it leans into the brutality of the story that needs to be told, and not the one that feels manufactured for the sake of filling out a few extra episodes. The PTSD of Obi-Wan, the nightmares, the uncertainty in his skills, the rocky relationship with Bail, the fears of the future, the feral nature of his apprentice, the emotions of what came before, and the chance to prove himself once more are the high ground here. But we only get a minuscule amount of all these things, and I just simply wanted more. I would have loved if this show focused solely on Kenobi, Uncle Owen, Vader, and maybe Qui-Gon or Bail if done so sparingly. After all, these are the characters whose relationships with Ben are most important to his place in this post-Republic world, and these are the people that could have been used as a lens for Kenobi's shattered identity to compare itself against. Comparing his world to theirs, his fears to theirs, and his fall in front of them, with the story then regressing itself back into a tale of the how, the why, and the importance of those narrative beats. Imagine the details we could have learned through more conversations with Owen, through better build-up and emotional payoff against Vader, through potential interactions with the homeless clone trooper, through round-table sit-downs with Qui-Gon, through necessary Clone Wars or era-specific flashbacks with Anakin. This was the time to use all of these resources to tell a story, not an episode, and give the necessary room for the more mature experience. The lore is there, the opportunity is there, the ideas are there. The scenes with Owen are great, the dialogue with Vader is great, the single flashback with Anakin is everything we need, but why only once? Why do we only experience these moments just once, so quickly and so late into the season? Sure, at the end of this, I have my nitpicks. It's impossible not to. I often found myself waiting for the show to give me the answers to plot holes it created that should have worked, but they just never came. In hindsight, the Inquisitors were barely a threat at all. Vader had some questionable decision-making, Reva only became a real but still predictable character by episode 5, the plot felt like 3 different shows happening at once, there was a confusing lack of polish and budget, the shaky cam and uninspired action was disappointing, the direction left so much to be desired, the weird inconsistencies with the lightsabers and their functions and presentations was confusing, the lack of classic Star Wars music was tough to swallow, and in the end, with all of the writing issues and low-stakes plot devices that kept me from ever being truly emotionally invested in this weird journey, Obi-Wan ended the show right where he started it, and that's the problem. There was so much of this story that was simply glossed over because we had to keep moving things forward, but when you get lazy with your storytelling, you can't expect the audience to always be along for the ride. Setting aside how quickly this became the Leia and Reva show, which I'm all for, just not right now when we were told this was about Obi-Wan and his story, there was no journey to be explored here that couldn't have been done in a 2-hour high-budget film. This wasn't Logan. This wasn't Joker. This wasn't an extensive submergence into the riddled subconscious of a broken hero, nor was it the mature character study we had hoped it would be. In fact, I found myself struggling to care about Vader and Kenobi once we skipped through the wasted opportunity with the Bacta-Tank. What could have been Clone Wars flashbacks, or coming to terms with the grief and anger and pain for Obi-Wan after seeing Anakin for the first time in a decade. What could have been his eventual snap back to the Force to connect with Qui-Gon was instead a mere 5-second transition from one scene to back to rescuing Leia. Again, the first rematch in hindsight was a bit rushed, but what it set up was so interesting and a beautiful parallel that could have paid off. Their eventual rematch was just as intense, but I couldn't find the emotion that I'm sure so many of you did because, to me, it didn't feel earned. A lot of this show, in its conclusions, didn't feel earned, and when I was struggling to understand why things were happening or why things weren't happening, I couldn't connect myself to the promise of the emotional payoff. While looking upon the fight now, I think it's great, and I think the ending is some of the best Star Wars we've had in decades. So much of it, from the cinematography to the location of the fight, the lack of build-up, the lack of investment from Obi-Wan to get to that moment, it all reminds me how little I felt towards the moment when I first saw it. The most emotion I felt at all during this series was during the flashbacks and the conversations between legacy characters, or when the fight scenes had concluded. When all of your investment stems from select moments, the remaining plot underneath has to be able to carry that load. And this plot could barely get us from episode to episode. I heard a lot about expectations before this show aired, and many fans voiced their opinions just as I'm doing to you. But I think the one place where I disagree about expectations within Star Wars is that when it comes to using legacy characters, there needs to be an attention to detail that surpasses all other third parties in the same universe. I've talked about it before, but Star Wars is still trying to reach that next cinematic level in storytelling and presentation in a way that evolves the product while staying true to the characters it represents. Rogue One does all of this masterfully, but for some reason, the legacy heroes of this sandbox have gotten the short end of the stick. This sandbox that we all love and constantly live through because of various movies it shows only has a few key players at the heart of it all. And if we don't recognize that and why that matters, then there's no difference between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jar Jar Binks. If Obi-Wan is paraded around as Obi-Wan in name only, without all of the canonical context and details that give his character the status it has, then what truly is his importance here? I believe that as the caretakers of such storied and treasured icons in the history of fantasy and film, there does come a responsibility to treat these characters differently than all others that come after. Look, at the end of the day, no matter how disappointed I may get with something as important to me as Star Wars, I still love it as much as I love the MCU. Through the ups and downs, the great and the not so, I want people to enjoy Star Wars through and through. I have issues with this show. I have disappointments with a lot of it, and I really wish it turned out differently, but I guess I'm choosing to look at what I'm grateful for, and Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen getting a chance to be Obi-Wan and Anakin again is what I'll take away from this series. Obi-Wan Kenobi was the most highly anticipated Star Wars project I think I can ever really remember, and though it didn't succeed in my eyes, Ewan and Hayden absolutely did, and that's the canon I'll remember. And as always, thanks for watching.